quite some people joining. I can see the list, going up in terms of numbers. So I will just say a little bit of background information for the time being in terms of the attendance. Then we will introduce ourselves to you, and from that we will start the webinar, the real content aspect, within probably 2 minutes. So today we're really glad to get representatives from many different countries. So we have a very large group from Brazil. We have a very large group from Mexico. So this will really be the one of these two countries that we have the highest number of representatives in this webinar. But we also have people from Algeria, Argentina, Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Finland, France. We have a few, Germany, Kenya, Luxembourg. We have also people from where? From Peru, from the Netherlands, from Poland, a good group from Poland as well. Portugal, Russian Federation, Spain, Turkey, Ukraine, USA, and Venezuela. So welcome to all of you. Yes, someone already claiming victory for Poland. Fantastic. So maybe I will leave the floor to Andressa to introduce herself. I don't know if she's going to be speaking Portuguese, Spanish, or English, but we'll continue in English anyway.
Hello, everyone. So, bom dia, Brazil. I'm also Brazilian, so I'm really happy to see a large population from my beautiful country there. So, good morning for you out there. So, I'm Andressa Hayes. I'm a global category buyer working for Heineken in Netherlands. So, I live in Netherlands in Amsterdam. And I'm here to co-host that with Hervé as well to talk about Agile in procurement, which is one of the projects as well that I've started to implement when I was doing my certification for purchasing manager in EIPM last year. So I'm really glad to be here with you. Thank you for joining.
My name is Hervé Legendre. I'm professor at EIPM. I'm also leading all the activities relating to research, and that includes on a regular basis to report on some of the latest development on procurement, and including on everything related to Agile. Just to make your life easy, you can use, and some people have started to do that, but you can use the chat. You probably find that on the bottom right of your screen. So you can place any comments, any questions at any time. Most of the time, we pick the question on the go, and we provide some answers. It can happen, we say, hey, this will come very soon, but we try to be as reactive as possible. At the end of the presentation, you will receive a video replay for the session, so you'll have access to the video, and you will receive a copy of this presentation. And a bit later, within a month and a half probably, we'll be sending you also an article, because what we will be presenting today is also going to be published as an article in the European Business Review. So it will be in open access for a month. So we'll make sure you also get the article at that time. And we have a bom dia from Brazil. Okay, great. So also at the end of the webinar, we will have a very short feedback form for you. So please, stay for an extra minute. It doesn't take much more to fill in the feedback. Topic of the day, agility, being agile. So, I had a bit of fun. I've been putting agility in Google and looked at the images coming up, and I've got all these fantastic dogs, running around and jumping around. But I think no, this is not exactly what we should be talking about. We have people from Mexico reacting, and Poland now. So it's like a competition now. Okay, great. So let me start a little bit by introducing why do we need to think in terms of Agile, especially for the Agile vendor selection process, and give you a little bit of background on Agile. Then Andressa will share with you some of the all the steps, all the practice related to running an Agile vendor selection process. And then toward the end, we will discuss about when can you use this type of approach and when it might not be recommended to use this. The experience so far from Andressa has been a lot related to applying it in a context of software, but this is something that can be adapted to other categories within certain boundary conditions. Today, we have a lot of these green giants in procurement. I meet them on a regular basis. They say, well, I always end up massifying. I use my traditional vendor selection process and I'm achieving cost saving. But deep in my heart, I would really want to collaborate more and create more value. And, that's part of the logic of today. And we also have these Peter Pans, a bit more like, another green character who are trying to do things differently, a more childish, a more playful type of spirit. But they say, we do things in procurement, but we keep quiet. And our belief is today, the world is changing fast. We've got the business who's looking on an ongoing basis for new solutions. We've got the markets and the suppliers coming up with some innovative features into their product and everything. So basically, we live in a world where we need to combine pace and power. We're still using, as much as we can, the possibilities given by synergies across a business to better leverage our market position. But we also need to work at a certain pace in order to bring some of the novelty from the market to the business, in a way that's really helping to move the company forward and be innovative. So the world of Agile has been a practice coming a lot from the software development world, and the idea really was things were becoming more difficult to predict. In the software world, it was difficult to know exactly what type of features should be embedded in the software. So instead of trying to predict everything from the start, to adopt a more iterative process where people would be collaborating and gaining efficiency, speed, and motivation in order to continuously adapt to the situation and create value for the business. And in many ways, what's really interesting is this, the core principle, the mindset behind this agile way of doing things in software is very easily it's very easy to replicate in a procurement context. We have situations where there's some dimension of unpredictability, where the requirement can be quite difficult to formalize because there's new options coming from the market, and the users are diverse, but also the solutions are diverse. So we can't start from a clear set of requirements. So how to address that? Well, we need collaboration with the internal stakeholders to rapidly come up with high-level goals, and we need collaboration with supplier so they can quickly react to these high-level goals we can provide to them. This should be a way of having face-to-face exchange, quality of exchange, that helps to simplify the process and to gain efficiency, to gain speed, to gain motivation. And all this as an iterative process is here to deliver value for the internal stakeholders, for the users, and potentially for the client of the companies. So Agile is often synonymous of speed, but it's first and foremost the ability in a context where you can't predict from day one what will your solution looking at the end, to work in a collaborative mode in order to, through iteration, being able to deliver the best potential solutions to the business. The first person who's been bringing the concept of the idea of Agile to procurement is Mirko Kleiner from Flow Days. And we had him for a workshop something like 18 months ago when Andressa was here. And that's how she picked the concept and started to implement it and came up with some very interesting ways of making this happen. One important message before I pass, to Andressa is in procurement, we tend to follow a number of steps. We have a number of gates that we are passing during a classical purchasing process. The idea of agile vendor selection is not to change all of this, but it's to do things differently within each of these phases. And what is something that will be taking usually a few months is something that should now be taking through the collaboration, the simplification, and this agile approach should be taking a number of weeks. So, Andressa, the floor is yours. I'll let you go on and share some of your views and how it works.
Sure. So when we talk an agile vendor selection, so we are not, as Hervé said, trying to reinvent the wheel. So we are not just saying that the procurement process or the by the book RFP process should just stop. That's not what we mean. So the approach here is to say that we should be bimodal. So, and what does it mean? So where we can really apply, where we cannot, and what are the differences in the agile approach? If you take like all the principles of agile for software development, for example, so it's really based on collaboration. You prioritize what matters, and that's what we try to do here, is really to focus on the value added and not really on the details that are not important. However, the steps are still the same. So you see here you have plan and prepare, you have tender, evaluation, negotiation, and award. So nothing different. The difference is that instead of really going on the step by step where you need predictability, you have right risks, for example, for some of the projects, a strict timeline. So you change from that word to the word that we are living today, which some of our stakeholders, they know what they want. So they know what's the final objective for a product you are buying or a service you are buying or for a software, which is my expertise. But the way to go there is flexible. So they are really relying on the suppliers' expertise. They are really relying on what the subject matter experts from the supplier side can really provide. And that's how Agile comes. So the sprint approach, let's say, where you really work in a collaborative way. So the effort you need to do for both process, so the procurement by the book process and the Agile process, they diverge because in the agile you really focus on what matters most. So you see here, I'm not going to read out the single words you have here, it's a lot, but it's really to give you that sense that we are still keeping the same process I've kept for some of my vendor selection process, and for other ones that really allows me more creativity and that kind of approach we could do differently. And because of that, because you are really focusing on what most matters most, so then you can go from months, as you can see in the first, to weeks. But doesn't mean that it's not requiring effort as well and a lot of hard work. So to exemplify how does it work and how the steps for that really works for an agile RFP process. So as you can see here,
Maybe
yeah,
Andressa, we've got one question, and
sure,
I can try to pick that one quickly first. So someone has
good.
been writing, Katrina, that recently I noticed companies called Agile Procurement as team with no assigned category. What do you think about it? So I think what we're sharing with today is essentially a logic of moving to Agile from a process perspective. How within a process you can, for the selection of vendors, you can gain some agility. What you describe is another way of thinking about applying the concept of agile, but more at an organization level. And this is very much in line with what we've presented in some past webinars on innovation, with the idea that on an ongoing basis, some of the innovation, some of the new things will be coming from categories, while maybe some of the innovative developments will actually be across categories, or they will be coming from outside of the categories, or they will be coming from totally different suppliers from the one we have today, and that therefore we need to keep that flexibility of taking people out from a rather classic category logic to put them on special projects or special units or special teams for a certain period of time in order to be able to conduct some of the activities outside of the classic boundaries of the categories. But that's more of an organization perspective. Happy to exchange with you on this if you want at some point, or maybe we can resend the link of one of the webinar where we've been talking about this point. But back to the logic of Agile in process logic, I would say, for the time being. Back to you, Angelisa.
So if we take on the process standpoint, so the focus here is to tell how we can implement the Agile methodology, like Scrum, for example, in a vendor selection process. So if we are back to the last slide where I was explaining that we still keep both models, so the procurement standard process is still there, but for some of the things we can take an agile approach. And if we take that agile approach, what would that look like then? And that's what we try to illustrate here. So you still have all of those steps. So we call them like the 7 steps. And then we give some key informations about each of them and how we can perform them. So the first step, the preparation, it's nothing like really reinventing the wheel as well, but it's really the preparation of what's going to be approached. So you still have the marketing analysis, you still have a pre-selection of the vendors. The difference here is that you are approaching your internal stakeholders in a different manner. So you will really identify what are the pain points they have and why do they need that product or that service, for example. What are the potential risks? So what kind of things can happen that can make how the project goes wrong? So it's really taking the storytelling of their need. Like I need that product because I'm having a problem in the production, for example. I need the product because my HR process needs to be really good because I need to catch more talents in the market. So it's really that type of storytelling that we are trying to identify in that step. I will give you some ideas on how I've done that as well in the next slide, but it's really to catch what it's really behind the requests from the stakeholders. So the next step, different from an agile process or a RFP, normal RFP process, is that you don't send like a big piece of paper with all the minimum details, all the list of minimum requirements that you really need the vendor to say, yes, I comply, or not, I'm not complying. So it's more open. So you are sending really an invitation letter, which is like around 2 pages, where you are explaining the reasons why, how you'd like to do that, and inviting the vendor to come and show you. So you're giving a problem on vendor's end and saying, are you able to provide me a solution for that? So you're inviting them to come and show you. After you provide them and you see their appetite really to work with you, so then you go a little bit more in detail, which is the Q&A call step, where the business, together with procurement, together with some really key core team of stakeholders, you are then presenting that to the vendors, usually by call. What are the main problem exposures you have? What's going to be the event format that you're inviting the vendor to come and show you? So you give them a little bit more details. In that phase, we are also going to share or start sharing the personas, which are the storytelling I'm gonna explain in the next slide. So once you send the invitation, so then they agree, they have an understanding of the problem need or the business, what it's really driving to business to take that decision. So then you go for the Agile RFP event. So that one that I will also show the agenda with you, how does it look like. It's really inviting out the vendors to come on site and show you how they're going to solve your problem, and at the same time addressing like the subject matter experts you have in your side with the ones they have in their end as well, to really ask specific questions between themselves so you can have a better understanding to score the vendors. So the other steps, there is nothing like really super different, but it's really go to the scoring side still as part of the team, the internal team defined at the beginning, have the best and final offer from the vendor, the final commercial mile to really close the contract, and then you award. So in the next slides, I will present a little bit more detail on what are the key things on the preparation step, and also how you approach that on the Agile RFP event itself.
We have a question. Are we
Good.
talking about an agile way to select a supplier, an agile way to work with a supplier previously selected?
Should I reply?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
good. So, yeah, we're talking about an agile way to select a new supplier. But sometimes, for example, you have a supplier in place which is not covering certain scope that you are predicting, and then you have a solution or something else that needs to be done. So, usually you go for that same supplier, but that's a way as well to leverage and to put your current supplier in some kind of competition as well, so you can better select either the same that you're already working on or other suppliers as well that you are also accessing.
And if I may, I mean, some of the elements we have here in terms of sharing some of the stories, the narratives about the expectations, some the workshop where people are working on prototypes. I mean, this is also something that you can use as part of a larger relationship with the supplier and SRM programs in order to take the next step with them if you decided you already that you wanted to work with them on specifics. But today we are looking at the broader perspective where you still want to create competition and you want to select the best out of a number of companies from out there.
Yeah, and also I strong believe that the way your supplier is behaving while you are selecting them, it's gonna show you as well how is it to work with them in the future. So it's not only about the solution or the service it's gonna be provided, it's about the people who are gonna provide it. So you have really a good account manager or someone really supporting you, and you can just see that like upfront before even selecting, so then it's really adding value for the selection process and for the post implementation and how you manage the supplier later. And if you manage to have the people from your end, like your internal stakeholders, the ones who are gonna really work on the relationship with the supplier on the day-to-day basis, for example, in that specific project, already meeting the people they are gonna work in the future, but from the beginning, can really easy their choice to go for a really good supplier in the end. So I think it's a little bit affecting each other, but yeah, but here the focus is really on the selection of it. I hope it clarifies.
Shall we
So,
say a few words about avatars and user journey?
yes. So now what I said on how we prepare and how we make it to be more value driven than than a normal RFP process. So what you see here, it's a persona. So it's a real user who is gonna use the solution or who is gonna be using the service, the product that you are buying. And the idea is to identify those personas in the internal workshop, so in the internal alignment. So with your stakeholders, you are going to discuss and brainstorm based on their problems that they are sharing in a format of storytelling. You're going to identify what other personas who are going to really benefit of that product or service. So, for example, here you have Lisa, which is a fleet key account manager. So you have her quick profile, let's say. Look, Lisa has just joined a Toyota, often on the road at customer premises. So everything about those people that specific person who is going to use the solution. So what do you do with that and how you identify? So you identify those personas through the problem exposure in the internal workshops, and then the next steps is you include those personas in a user journey. So for example, Lisa, it's gonna drive to the office, so she needs really to have a good tool to drive her there, and then she's gonna interact with that person. So it's the general user journey that Lisa it's gonna perform. So I will give one example of the first case I've managed to implement when I was working for Capgemini. It was a real-time performance management solution. So, if some of you have watched already some series, it's like you take your cell phone, I'm speaking to you now, and I'm giving you a rate like, oh, nice to work with you. So, in real time, you're going to have your feedback. So, that was the objective. So, the persona in that case was like the end user, the employee, that was interacting with another persona as well, the other employee, that was getting then the manager approval, finance check, and etc. So really to put that user in the user journey, that's what we identify from the beginning, and then we use that with the vendors as well. So, what do we do with those personas and user journeys? So, it's not only to self understanding of your stakeholders, but we also share with the vendors to tell this is my problem, those are the users. So, come and show me how the problem of each one of those personas and users in that user journey it's going to be solved with your service, your solution, or what you are going to offer me. That's the objective.
How many personas user journey you would recommend to have for a project?
Usually we have around 4 to 5, so 3 to 5. That's the ideal. And per each persona, for example, 1 or 2 user journeys. That's the average of the cases I've managed.
I think when we talk user journey, I think what's important to have in mind, they're not a very detailed description of what happens. And there are some of the main touch points where the person is going to be interacting with the solution, and simply an expression of what people might like about it, what are the fears, the concerns, the problems. So really, it's not about coming up with a detailed specification describing everything that's happening. It's got to be super simple, but it really helps to provide high-level expectation that will be giving space to the vendors so they can come up with some interesting solutions. Huh? So that's really the purpose of this. And the focus, like in innovation, very often is not so much on saying what we need, but also expressing some of the issues, some of the problems, the pain points that are really important to take into account when developing a solution.
Yes.
Okay, do you want to tell us something about the how to run the event?
Oops. Yes. So this is how it looks like. So remembering the 7 steps. So first, you build those personas, those user journeys, high level. Importance, it's really to access the capability of the vendors, of your suppliers. Then you send the letter. Then you have the deep dive sessions by call, usually, where you explain a little bit more, and then we have the event itself. So, what's the difference between a normal RFP and that event? Because in a normal RFP, I also have demos from the vendors. I also speak with them. They also share the proposal. So, what's the difference? Here is an example of what is the agenda of that event. So, usually it's 2 days event where we invite all the suppliers to come at the same time. So they know who are they competing against. So they will see each other there, shake hands, exchange business cards, change companies sometimes, and then they will see who are they competing against. The first thing here, it's on the in the morning. So it's frame the business goal, where you are going to again explain a little bit more about the user journeys, the business it will expose, what's the problem, how the business is really expecting the supplier to solve their problems. So at that stage, all the vendors are there listening to the same thing. So they can ask questions, they can have their responses, their answers. So all of them have exactly the same information. So in that step, you can also avoid that one vendor has a little bit more information than the other ones, and they cannot blame you as well. So what it's interesting on that step is that in some selection process, I don't know for you, but for me it happens a lot, is that the vendors are using the information against us. So like, oh, I know who I'm competing against. So they use that as something strong on their side. When you are changing it, so you are telling them those are your competitors. So what you're gonna do about it? So better to be good. Then after really sharing that with them, so it's a lot of information they are going to receive, you give them some time. So that's what you see here on the initial solution thinking, where they will go to separate rooms, which we can call like kind of home rooms, where they're going to really reflect about all the information they received. In that time, they can also receive feedback, real-time feedback from the subject matter experts. They're also attending there from our side. So you have the guys from your side that really needs to take the decision. So in my case, in a software selection process, so I need to have security, the data privacy guy because of all of those rules in Europe as well and around the world of the data privacy. I need legal because it's really important to protect my contract. I need the IT guys, I need someone from the architecture of the solution. So all of them are also there in the premises with me. So they are my team, they are my subject matter experts. So any question the vendor have during the initial solution thinking, they can just come and pick any of us to really check, like, is that really what you mean? So do I have the good understanding? So after having that, we all have lunch together. So all humans to need to eat something. And then later we go for the breakout sessions. So during the breakout sessions, it's really subject matter expert from my end with the subject matter experts from the supplier side, and we are interacting. So the guy from security is talking to the guy of the supplier of security. The legal is talking to the legal. Like commercially, I'm talking to the sales account. So it's really interactions between the peers to solve and get everything sorted before we really go select. It's really quick, straight to the point, and we do that in breakout sessions during the afternoon of day one and morning of the day two. After solving everything, so at that stage of time, everyone really solved most part of the questions with the vendors with us. So then they come now and present. So we have the presentations of the vendors. Usually it's two, three, maximum four. I think it's more than four, it's not so good. So then they come and present. During the pitch, during the presentation, they are going to be alone. So it's vendor and internal. One vendor is not seeing each other's presentation, which is really important for the vendors as well, the suppliers as well. So they are presenting at that stage the user journeys, the personas we shared before. So they're coming now and telling me, okay, based on that persona, that user journey, this is how I'm gonna run that in my solution or how I'm gonna solve your specific problem. So that's what they're gonna do individually in the afternoon of the day two. So at the end of that exercise of those 2 days, so each subject matter experts has solved most part of their questions. They felt from the vendor what are the best team maybe to work. So what's the vendor who is really willing to provide more information? And you see as well the vendors are really engaged because you are letting them out from their comfort zone. You are also out from a little bit of your comfort zone, and they are seeing an innovation and a little bit more challenge. So in general, the feedback of this it's really positive. And Hervé has interviewed some of the suppliers and also of the stakeholders to check how they felt and what's really their view about that kind of approach.
Yes, and maybe just before that, I will take. There was one question from Michelle saying, "Is a journey a kind of functional analysis, a description of the problems?" I wouldn't describe that purely as a functional analysis. Let me take a very concrete example. Imagine you've got to, out of software. Imagine you have to buy a piece of equipment for the research lab. So basically, in the user journey, you would be putting together the different personas that will be interacting with this piece of different people that in the personas that will be interacting with this piece of equipment. But for instance, for the scientist using it, there might be something about, a point where there is the installation. Then there is the calibration of the equipment before they do the experiments, when they set up all the parameters. Then there's a time they run the equipment, there's a time they do their analysis, and there's a time where, there might be the cleaning and the maintenance of the equipment. So in the user journey, you would be, putting some of these, big points in terms of steps that are part of the journey, the interaction that you have there. And then for each of these steps, you would have a description of what's important for the person, for the personas. What is it that they don't want to see happening? What are the their problems they've experiencing so far? So you're really describing their experience of it and what's important to them. So it's not really about going into detail in terms of specification. It's more about creating a picture of what's important for the user.
Yeah, it's important to say as well that in the Agile world, so if you take an Agile software development, so you are running from the KPIs to the key VIs. So it's really value driven. That's the same as well with the user journeys and the personas. So what's the value that persona in that journey that persona is going through wants to achieve? So it's really not going to detail, as Hervé said. It's more about what do you want to achieve, and you're going to see how the vendor is approaching it as well, how the supplier is going to solve that, and then really achieve the same value that you were perceiving from the beginning.
Okay, and someone is asking a question about working in a subcontracting, production subcontracting. Is it possible to run such event when company profile is high mix, low volume? So on high mix, low volume, yeah, I think it's probably easier when you have kind of a diversity of situation in order to get to solution. They make money operating on a few percent of profit, so still depending of you still need to have something attractive in terms of a case, so that you have vendors willing to come. It might be hard to make suppliers compete when the project quantity are not that high. Yeah. I think what's important is to still have a situation of competition, that the suppliers see it as an interesting opportunity. But if you're working on this type of high mix, low volume, that's possible in some cases. But you still need to be in a situation where there is competition and there's companies who want to compete and battle in order to get the opportunity to sell you something. And it's not just a commodity, but it's something a little bit more challenging with some diversity in terms of solution that can be provided, I would say. So answer is yes, but if you have that type of competition there.
Yeah, just to add, that kind of events, it's also a way to promote your company to the suppliers, because it makes you really attractive to do something more innovative that the suppliers really wants to work with you. So one of the feedbacks as well is that from many suppliers is that, like, wow, I really want to work with your team. Like, I really like that cooperation. So it's really a way to market and promote yourself towards your suppliers.
Okay, one of the things that we did is after Andressa has been running three initial projects using this approach, I've had the opportunity to go and interview some of the stakeholders and people from the business, from the legal team, others, but also some of the suppliers. And that's been a really rich experience of being able to get the people views on it, and a lot of very positives coming out of this discussion. So the one of the key points is people were saying is we spend a lot of time catching up. You know, you've got this long process to select suppliers. So, you know, one day I'm looking at a vendor, I'm trying to rate it according to a number of dimensions, and maybe it's going to be 6 months, 6 weeks after I'm going to look at the next one. So here, you know, you don't have to go back, say, oh, what was this one about? You have everybody in a single place, and this is really cutting on all the time you need to, you know, catch up, remind yourself, and it's also fair. You know, it brings a sense of fairness to the people because they feel that they're comparing at the same time, you know, a set of apples that are easier to look at conjointly. The second point is the stakeholders really enjoy to have these high-level business expectations. And they feel sometimes they're challenged to come up with very detailed specifications when, in fact, here, talking about the personas, giving a sense of the user journey was really a way for them not to spend too much time describing the needs, but giving enough information so they could be looking at solutions coming from the vendor. And on the vendor side, this was well appreciated because this is really something that gives them space, you know, to propose some of the unique features, some of the latest developments, some of the particularities they could bring to the game, and to come up with something that really, you know, fits the need. Some of the feedback we have were really like the event is the core of the process, and you know that vendors were surprised that you know all the people were there, and they could have a lot of discussions. And what's interesting, for instance, is you know if one vendor is raising an issue, then you know you can go to the other vendor and also raise that same issue with them. So there's a sort of a you know continuous alignment between the people. And also it's really about like you know one vendor says and we can make things like this and it looks like that, and you can touch it and feel it during the event. So it's also possible to really make sure that what people promise you are really things that you can see operating, that you can you know feel and touch. It's not just like running one demo from a different point in time and not really being able to get a sense of the details. And I think you know one of the key points that came out, especially from the internal stakeholders, what you know they really loved it because it was a different way of working. For a large company, it felt it was a faster way, more collaborative way. They had a better sense of yes, we're going to be able to get what we need, and also the idea that you know right after they would be able to start quickly to work with the vendor on making it happen. And that's one of the benefit as well. It's not something like you know you work on a long process and then after you kind of you know start from scratch. But what were the needs and then you know replan things. Um, Things go quick, so it's actually quite possible to get to implementation quite fast afterwards. I
I
think we
see
got
we
some more
have a
questions.
lot of
Yeah.
questions, which is great. So, do you want to take the first?
So I consider agility is dependable on the category and product service you're buying. Complex purchase may not be as agile as commodities. We could consider the okay. So I suggest, Luis, that we wait a few minutes because we've got a picture which is actually positioning agile according to the dimension like risk, complexity, novelty. So we would be coming up to that, back to this. As a wrap up, the internal team will define which supplier we want to work with, right? But how can we promote competition when talking about price? Uh, when talking about price, when the vendor already know he is the one selected.
Yeah, I can take just one. So, in the wrap up, in the final wrap up, you are not defining to the vendor that he's the one selected. So, you as an internal team, you are wrap upping internally and really defining, doing the scores, the decision metrics to define the preferred vendor. So what I used to do is at the end of the 2 days event, we have also a midday internal team workshop where we are really debriefing about everything. So based on that, we are shortlisting one or two vendors and going for commercial discussion. So I never tell the vendor he's the one selected before I have the wonderful price I want to have in the desk. And also, one of the important things I've noticed by bringing legal to the beginning of the process, because my legal is also there, it's also to take that step as one of the approvals that needs to be done before we communicate to that vendor he's selected. We need to agree in the contract.
Okay, another question is which categories have experienced agile events? So on your side, on Tressa, this is mainly software?
Yeah, so in my end, it's mainly on the IT category, which is what I work for. But we also started to develop while I was in Capgemini, to do that in the marketing or in other service categories as well.
So if I can say, I've also had experience starting to coach some people in other companies using this on some equipment and some hardware as well. And we'll look back again at the matrix we're going to be sharing at the end in terms of when to use it. So I think it's very easy to implement it on some software, some services, and you can take the spirit of what we've presented and slightly adapt it maybe when you have some equipment, depending of the size and the nature of the process at stake, you might do things slightly differently. Other question, are the suppliers complete their proposal in a 2-day working session, or proposal are already prepared by the supplier before these 2 days?
Flexible. So I've done in 2 ways already. So one is they prepare and they are showing me their commercial proposal during the commercial breakout session. So that's where they need to present me the commercial proposal. It's one way. The other way is they do that in advance based on the user journeys and personas we are sharing with them. So then you have a first estimation at least that you can discuss as well in the breakout session. So, but it's up to you. It's not like we really need to provide really go for each one of those steps like in that way. It's agile, so it's flexible. So it works in the best way you think it's gonna work for your internal customers and for our company.
Okay. Silmara, have we answered all the questions?
I think there is one left from Everton, which is in the user journeys, people from which company departments are usually considered. So if you mean like who is building it, so usually it's the business owner, so it's the one really needing the solution, and he's the one building it and considering everyone, for example, that needs also to be connected. So who are the personas itself? It's gonna depend on the scope of what you're buying. I hope that's what you mean. And I think we answer all of the questions.
Okay. And I think what you mentioned is people from legal and other departments joining also during the event, huh?
Yes, it's really key as well because you anticipate a lot of discussions that usually it's afterwards and they are part of the decision and it makes everything much easier.
So this is really a good transition to get to the next point, which is what are the success factors? So first you need to build a great team. So what do we mean? We mean people who are engaged, but people who have the right expertise and the power to take decisions. So we need the people who have a stake into the final solution implementation, people who have a stake in defining, the contract with that supplier, and people who can really be accountable in terms of decision taken related to the situation. The involvement is in a shorter amount of time, but it's important to make sure that people have this ability to, get things done. The second point is the diversity and the attitude. This can only work if we have a certain degree of, people being proactive, people being open-minded. But what's important is we start from, some high-level expectations. We start from the personas, we start from the user journey. And we all have anticipation. We all believe we kind of pre-visualize the type of solution that's going to be coming up. So what's really important here is to have people in terms of mindset who are ready to challenge their initial assumptions. If they start to becoming something that's slightly different from what they expected, they need to, well, okay, maybe that's an interesting way. So we need this kind of a mental flexibility in order to be able to, have something that's evolving throughout this very short process while, keeping confidence into the picture. Company readiness is we need a minimum in terms of being able to take risk and having some supportive business sponsor from the company. So really some people from the business side, who are interested, who support this way of doing things. So you make sure that you've got all the key people from inside, at the right time, at the right place, because we can't come with, half of the team into the Agile event, for instance. And logistics, you might need to have the right facilities. You want to have a place where people can come from plenary sessions, all the vendors, but you also need places where they feel secure in terms of atmosphere, that they can work in a confidential way, that you don't hear across the walls. So you need to have facilities that are supportive of this kind of large group, smaller group kind of a situation. And you might consider, being a facilitator for the event yourself, or you might consider, asking someone from a innovation department or from another team to help in terms of the facilitation of the event, because this is slightly different from some of the meeting we might be running day in, day out. I'd like to move to the next one, because I think that's when a number of things are going to get clearer on when you use this. Okay. So we've got this picture that takes into consideration two aspects. The first one is, what we buy, to what extent there is something new about it. Okay. So if it's really a basic commodity, then you might not be considering applying an agile vendor selection process. You need to have a situation with unpredictability in terms of the final outcomes. You need to have the opportunity to get some of the knowledge, solution, innovative feature from the vendors integrated in your final solutions. If you have a non-risky situation where there is no novelty, then you are purely in a very tactical buying process that should be automated. Here, you need something where there's option to bring some, maybe not radical innovation, but something new to your company that have already been, worked on by the supplier. Now, the second dimension is the risk and the stake. Okay, this type of project is best suited when you've got a limited number of risk and stake on the picture. If you have, you're getting into something that's technically very complex, you don't know yet what is the best potential technology that could be supporting, the final solution, and you have lots of novelty at stake. Maybe you need to have a more open innovation type of process where you're going to be progressing through a number of stages, running some innovation workshops, trying to understand all the different potential supportive technology, think which one would be able to do the job, and then in a second stage, taking a process by which you will be within selected technology, trying to see how they can fit you with your initial solutions. And maybe you can use the agile vendor selection at the end of the process. Upfront, more RFI, more innovation workshops, more exploration, scouting, and maybe toward the end use this. But if you are in a situation, for instance, where you need to, you might not have a lot of novelty, but you need to address some very strong risk. So, for instance, if you are thinking of a process where you're outsourcing a lot of things and you've got a lot of stakes in terms of people being transferred, Then, this is at the bottom right. This is a more classic tender process where you're going to be doing some systematic planning. You're going to be looking at all the risk. Huh? So that would not be fit for a situation for using the agile vendor selection process. If you want, on the left side of the picture, this is every time you want to accelerate. I have a situation where I can accelerate my classic process. And on the right side, you've got a situation where you want to anticipate. You want to, make sure that you take all the challenge, all the risk upstream into account before getting to the final stage of the selection. And at the bottom, you're purely exploiting a situation in terms of working on something you know already, and often vendors you already know, while on the top, you're also kind of exploring a little bit more. So that's somehow, whether you're talking about software, service, or some goods, you would be using the agile vendor selection process when you have limited risk and stakes, but some degree of novelty that makes it interesting to open the process to look at alternative solutions. We've got more questions.
Yes, seems that we have at least two.
Oh,
So
we've got
if
a question about reverse auctions. Mm-hmm.
I would like to reply on this one, but I would like just to do a comment on the last one from Michelle. So yes, supplier, good team from the supplier as well. It's also key. So that's why during the Q&A session, I'm also sharing with the supplier the agenda. So how this is gonna work and who from my side will be there. So then the supplier can also prepare and know, okay, so if that important people who is taking decision will be there, I also need to take someone from my end that needs also to take the decision and needs empowered to do so. So that's really a great thing.
I think the question about the reverse auction. So what I would believe is, if you look at the picture we have in front of us, the reverse auction is something where, is something that you might be positioned here on the diagram. So you pass some information, you have sort of a RFI upstream, and then when you've got all the data, all the information, then you go purely into an auction mode. So I think that's not exactly what we've really been talking about. This would be a bit more here in terms of a process between a tactical buying process and a more classic tendering process. Auctions are very good when it's very easy to define, what you want at the end. But I'm not the expert of auctions at the same time. Okay. So I think we're reaching the end, huh? So what will happen next? We will be sharing with you some of the all the slides, all the content. There will be a short survey, so if you can stay a few minutes. I want to say a big thank you to Andressa. It's a unique privilege, to just to have someone like her being joining a program with us and contributing to really think differently and implement some novelty, and now being willing to share back with the broader community. And I'm sure in the future we'll have more opportunity to talk about agile, more opportunity to share some of the practice. But a special thank you to you for now.
Thank you so much, Hervé. It's also a pleasure as well to work with you and all the IPM team. And really good to be here presenting that to you. So for a while it was like my baby, and I'm really glad to share my baby with you as well. So thank you so much for everyone for attending. And yeah, see you
We're
next
getting a
time,
lot of
maybe.
obrigada. Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye bye.